Welcome to Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to minrovers.org. And now let's get into this Tuesday evening presentation.
This week's presentation is a very special person, Fran Lucico. She is going to be talking about purchasing a kayak. So if you're considering purchasing a kayak or wondering about all the different options, long or short, fiberglass or plastic, or maybe you've done some kayaking or considering moving to trying whitewater, this is for you. So Fran has been, I'm going to kind of be extemporaneous here, but Fran has been a kayakaholic for a number of years and has a garage full of kayaks. So she's been a rover since 2007. She's a self-diagnosed kayakaholic. She has a British Canoeing Union 3-star award in coastal kayaking. You'll have to tell us about that. And a Paddle Canada Level 2. She's camped out of a sea kayak for up to 10 days at a time in Canada, the US, Mexico, and New Zealand. And she's had training in whitewater paddling, and in 2014 spent a week whitewater rafting and camping in the salmon rivers.
Yes, I am a kayakaholic and a certified kayak hoarder. And you get to hear about it. There's a warning that comes with this presentation. I may spontaneously start talking about kayaks in any setting. So be warned. Also be warned that kayaking is highly addictive. And if you get a kayak and start paddling, you will start changing things in your life to accommodating your paddling habit. You may fill up your garage with kayaks. You may purchase your car based on the kind of roof rack and how you're going to transport your kayak. You may start hanging out with kayakers and not so much with your other friends. I had a good friend, and she joined a kayak club that I was in, and she said that she joined because she thought she might meet some interesting men there. But now, she's all about the kayaking, and if a guy doesn't kayak, what good is he? So I'm going to talk a little bit about kayaking. The thing is, if you don't know a lot about kayaks, you may be looking, you may wander through REI or Midwest Mountaineering, or God forbid, next month you go to Canoecopia in Madison and see a bazillion kayaks and go, oh, well, but how do you pick? What are these kayaks for? The 4 that I have here that I sort of randomly picked are all recreational kayaks. One is a sit on top. The other 3 you sit in more. This one is a tandem. The red one is a tandem. This one over here does not have any dry hatches or a bulkhead. This one here has one in the bow. Okay, so a bulkhead is basically a compartment that is separated from the cockpit, which is where you sit. And if you have a bulkhead and you have a sealed hatch like this, you can store stuff. Well, it may not stay completely dry, but it'll stay mostly dry if you have it in dry bags and stuff. And it also means that there's air in there that helps support the boat, that provides flotation if you happen to flip over. So that can be pretty important. But these are just some examples. I'm a member of a Facebook group called the Church of the Double-Bladed Paddle, and Often some new person will sign on and go, oh, I'm so excited. I've decided I'm going to get a kayak. What kind is the best? And immediately there are 100 responses and everybody responds with their own personal favorite kayak. And often they don't even think about what is it that this person wants to do with it, because kayaks are appropriate for particular kinds of things, and you can't get a kayak that works for everything. So you have to either make some decisions or stockpile extra kayaks. So what is it that you want to do in a kayak? You can do all of these things, and I do multiple ones of these. You can have really calm, relaxing paddles on flat water. Sometimes it's really good at sunrise if you're a morning person, which I'm not, but you can have a blast, social paddling with friends. The Rovers in past years had times when they had something like 80 kayaks and canoes on the St. Croix, and it was a party. So you can socialize. You can do whitewater kayaking or kayak surfing and get a real adrenaline rush. You can fish out of a kayak, and there's specific kayaks for that, and they're kind of interesting. You can engage in photography. A couple weeks ago, we heard from Brian Hansel, and Brian, well, that was weird. And Brian is a photographer, but he started out as a kayaker and a kayak guide, and he got so into taking pictures that he kind of shifted over to becoming a professional photographer, but he still takes pictures out of his kayak. You can camp and go on expeditions out of kayaks, which I love to do. You can visit all kinds of cool places. There's some people who kayak for exercise. Now, I exercise, so I'll have the endurance to kayak. If I kayaked for exercise, I probably wouldn't like it as much, although it is good exercise. There are also people who explore cultural things. There are people who are into what they call traditional kayaking, Inuit culture, Greenlandic culture. They build skin-on-frame boats. We've previously had presentations from people who do that. They often use these funny, long, skinny kinds of paddles, which actually is what I use. They build their own boats that are wood frame, and that they put some kind of a skin, because it's not really a skin in this day. It's more Dacron polyester. Some of these are low volume. They do all kinds of things. They do lots of weird rolling kinds of things and stuff. I use one of these paddles, but I haven't built my own boat. So there are a lot of different ways that you can put all of this together. I enjoy hanging out and doing the rolling and doing that stuff. I enjoy camping and visiting cool places. Sometimes the adrenaline rush is fun, but I've gotten older and it's not as much fun as it used to be. But there's all kinds of things that you can do. What you want to do paddling determines what kind of boat you need, because these things can be different. Okay. Also, where do you want to paddle? Which is related to the first question. Do you want to be on flat water? Do you want to be on little bodies of water like, or you know, you could go down to Lake Nokomis. Sometimes it gets windy there, or you can go to even smaller lakes and paddle around, and it's nice and pleasant. And you can use most any kayak safely to do that. That's not a big deal. You can do whitewater and rush through rapids. Some people go so far as to go down waterfalls. You can do all kinds of things like that. You can get in moving water. So water with current is moving water. The Mississippi River, the St. Croix in the spring can be real moving water. It's not whitewater rapids, but it's moving and there's a lot of current. Also, if you paddle on the ocean, tide races or tidal currents are moving water. You can paddle on slower rivers, and most of the time, except in the spring, the St. Croix is like that, and the St. Croix is a lot of fun. You can paddle on little creeks like Minnehaha Creek or other creeks. Some of them are really rocky, and that's going to affect what kind of paddle, what kind of kayak you need. I sort of got caught up in sea kayaking, and that's most of what I do. And I have sea kayaks and expedition boats. And my boats are not really appropriate for little creeks or rocky places because they're really long. And so being longer means they go straight better, but they don't turn as easily. And it's really tight to make turns on them if you have a really narrow body of water. But also if things are rocky, my boats are made of fiberglass, or one is carbon Kevlar, and I would smash them up on the rocks. You know, one of my boats had an unfortunate experience with rocks on Lake Superior, and so you have to think about what the boat is made of and what it can tolerate and where you want to paddle. If you took a little boat, a little short whitewater boat that's real turny and maneuverable, and you were out on a really big body of water, you would spend all of your time straightening out the boat because it would keep turning with every stroke. And if you're on a big body of water, you want to be able to just go straight and get places. Okay. So those are important things to think about. When I paddle in places that aren't appropriate for my kayak, I use a different one. I use a shorter plastic boat. Also, there's some logistical stuff, like how are you going to get your kayak to the water? Where are you going to store it? If you live in a tiny apartment and you drive, you know, a tiny car, then it's going to be a problem how you get your kayak around, and also if where you're going to store it. Kayaks, a big kayak doesn't necessarily fit in a tiny apartment, and you have to figure out, if you have a 17-foot sea kayak, you have to figure out how you're going to get it around. There are people that get kayak trailers. That adds some of its own logistical things, although it has the advantage of you don't necessarily have to get it up on top of a car if you have a heavy kayak. But these are things to think about. And some people opt to get an inflatable or a folding kayak because they can fit it in those smaller places. And we'll see some pictures of some of those in a minute. And all of these are related to what it's going to be made of. Probably the most frequent kind of material that kayaks are made of is rotomolded plastic, okay, which is pretty strong stuff. It does pretty well. It does pretty well on rocks and getting banged up. It's really heavy, and that's one of the disadvantages of it. It can be a little bit slower than some of the composite boats. Most wreck kayaks and some sea kayaks and almost all whitewater kayaks are made of rotomolded plastic. There's thermoformed plastic, which is a little bit, it looks more slick and smooth, and it's lighter weight, but it can be banged up and damaged. There's fiberglass, which is heavier than thermoformed plastic, but lighter than rotomolded plastic, and can be a nice material. You can bang it up. You don't want it in real rocky places where you're banging on the rocks. But actually, several of my sea kayaks are that. One of them is carbon Kevlar, which is the lightest, but is the most expensive. And you're also gonna, and you can also bang that up pretty bad if you're not careful. There are the inflatable ones are made of some tough vinyl kind of stuff. That doesn't mean that they can't be damaged. The disadvantage of that is you put a hole in it, you're kind of screwed. You know, maybe you can patch it with duct tape and get to wherever you're going, but you've got a problem, okay? Especially if a lot of the air leaks out. We're going to talk a little bit. There's some of the folding boats are made with some fabric stuff that I'll show you in a minute. Some people build their own boats or buy them. If you buy them, they're expensive. But a friend of mine who was at the Fall Extravaganza builds beautiful, beautiful strip boats that are just gorgeous. They're a lot of work. They're pretty durable. He kind of overbuilds them, so they're pretty heavy. I've known wood boats that were fairly light. And then there are those weird traditional Inuit skin-on frame things, and those tend to be super, super light. And you coat the fabric around it, the Dacron polyester, whatever you decide to use. You coat that with coats of sealant and stuff, and they actually tend to be pretty tough. And if that skin wears out, you can take the frame and reskin it. The Inuit, when they did this, especially in Greenland, they didn't have a lot of wood. They used driftwood. They used what they could use, and then they used animal skins, and they built these. And then when they started to wear out, they would reuse the wood because wood was a high premium. So they wouldn't build the boats totally out of wood. They would use it for the frame. So, so those are the kinds of things that it could be made of, and that affects where you can take it, how much it's going to weigh, transportability, stuff like that. So then there's other kinds of design factors. Do you want a boat that you can sit on, or do you want a boat that you're going to sit on top? Some of you might look at some of these teeny little kayaks, teeny little kayak cockpits that you get into, especially in sea kayaks, and go, holy smokes, how am I going to get in that space? My first kayak that I bought one with way too big a cockpit because I was concerned about being trapped in that little space. And I paddled it for a year, and then I felt like I was sitting in a bathtub because it was really too big for me. If you are older, if you have had knee replacements, you may have to work on your flexibility to get in and out of those little cockpits. I know that I certainly have had to do that, but it's quite possible. Some people prefer the sit-on tops because they don't like the tiny cockpits. Sit-on tops can be handy. You tend to get wetter, and there are some issues with stability that we're going to talk about in a minute. They can't sink. They have little scupper holes, which means water comes in and the water goes out, and so that's kind of handy. But they can be cold. I was in Texas a couple of weeks ago and had an opportunity to paddle. It would have been on one of those boats, and we were in the deep freeze here, but it was pretty damn cold in Texas and windy. And there are times when you may plan to do an outdoor activity, and you may get there and you may go, you know, this is not realistic today. And you have to be willing to make those decisions. So you want to sit in it, you want to sit on top. Sit in boats with bulkheads and dry hatches are what you need if you're going to do serious camping and expedition stuff. Flotation, as I mentioned, you know, there are some boats that don't have any built-in flotation. Whitewater boats don't typically have built-in flotation, but you use float bags, which provide flotation. Other boats have sealed bulkheads. There are some wreck boats that have absolutely no flotation, and I find them a little bit scary. They might be fine on total flat water, but I might be concerned if you flipped, if they were going to get filled up with water, that might be a problem. Tracking versus maneuverability. You can have a boat that tracks and goes in a straight line, or you can have a boat that is super maneuverable. You can't have both. And often there are trade-offs about this. So whitewater boats tend to be really maneuverable and turny and all of that because you have to be able to maneuver them around rocks and around twists and turns and things like that. Sea kayaks tend to be longer and go in a straight line. Now, there's some caveats about that. One of the kinds of sea kayaks that I like best, which are similar to some of the Greenland style boats, have a lot of rocker where the ends stick up. And I'll show you pictures of that. And what that means, okay, the speed that a boat can go is related to the square of its water line. So if you have a really long boat that doesn't turn up at the ends, that's going to go pretty straight and pretty fast. If you have one that turns up at the ends, one of the things that you can do is something called edging, which is where you put the boat on an edge, okay? It changes the shape of the water line, and you can use that. My sea kayaks, if I edge this way, they'll go that way, and I don't have to spend a lot of time, so they're more maneuverable. And so they're kind of a compromise. On really long trips, some people prefer just a really straight long kayak that doesn't do that. I think it's more fun to be able to play around and maneuver a little bit. So you can have boats that track and boats that can be maneuverable. Now, especially in big water, boats can get kayaks can get blown around. Okay. Most recreational kayaks don't have anything to manage that. When you get into longer kayaks, they have something called a skeg or a rudder. A skeg is a little fin that drops down from underneath the boat. A rudder is on the stern of the boat. I'll show you pictures of that too. People have serious arguments about which is better, a skeg or a rudder. I go for the skeg, but it's perfectly legitimate that people go for rudders. Some people like to go in tandem boats and paddle with a friend. Some people really prefer to be in their own boat. I lean towards being in my own boat. There are people who refer to tandem boats as divorce boats, but I won't make any judgments about that. You want a partner that you feel comfortable with and that you're able to work with, or it can turn into an argument, especially when conditions get bad and you have different opinions about what you want to be doing. Spray skirt or not. You guys know what a spray skirt is? A spray skirt is sort of like a neoprene deck, but you wear it. You wear it, and then it goes around the edge of your cockpit combing, and it means that water won't collect in the boat. It means that waves can just wash right over the boat. And they use those in whitewater boats to keep them from filling up with water. And it also allows it to be easier to roll a boat, because when you roll it, it won't fill up with water. Sea kayaks use that. Big water. If I was paddling on Lake Superior and had big waves, if I didn't have a spray skirt, my boat would start filling up with water, and that could be a problem, partly because the water's pretty darn cold, and partly because it's going to affect my maneuverability and stuff. Primary versus secondary stability. Now, this is a little bit more complicated stuff, but probably new people kayaking want to get in a kayak that's nice and flat and stable. And they may feel that way about some of the sit-on tops. Oh, it's easy to get in. I don't have to climb all inside. And it feels nice and stable. And if you get in one of my skinny sea kayaks, you may go, whoa. Primary stability is how stable it feels when you first get it, when you just get into it and you're just sitting in it, okay? Secondary stability is how stable it feels when you're more on an edge. So imagine this. Imagine that you have a really wide recreational kayak. And with this recreational kayak, you're on a flat body of water. Maybe you're on the chain of lakes on a real calm day, and you're paddling, and you're going to feel really super stable. Now imagine you're on different water and there's more waves, okay? And those waves come, and your boat sits on the water, and on the waves, they're more up like this, okay? And it's hard to control that. And if the waves are big enough, they can easily flip it. Believe me, I've done it. But if you have something that is a skinnier, more maneuverable kind of kayak, and you could do this in sea kayaks, and you can do this in whitewater kayaks, what you can do is you can lean into that wave, and you will be stable on edge. So that's the secondary stability, and you will be fine in bigger waves. So that's where the shape of the kayak and what kind of kayak it is and where you want to paddle are related. You may go, well, if I'm going to be on hard water, I want to be in something that feels stable. Well, what you really want is the secondary stability. You may want some primary stability, but what you're really going to need on rough water is secondary stability.
That's not the secondary. To me, it sounds like the secondary stability also has to do with your skill at how much expertise is someone learning. Secondary stability seems like what comes along with that is how good you are in the kayak and your experience.
Okay, Melissa's saying Doesn't secondary stability partly have to do with how good you are in a kayak and with your experience? And you're right, partly, but if I'm going to sit on top, I'm not going to be able to edge it. It's just not a boat that I can do that. When I said that I had flipped, I once was on an inflatable kayak on the Salmon River, and I was trying to hit this rapids at this exact line, and you know, here I am paddling like crazy, but it didn't maneuver like my kayaks, and instead I went in totally wrong, and it just lifted me up and flipped me right over. So yeah, so it's both. Yeah, you need to be able to learn to manage the boat, but if the boat doesn't fit you closely, if it's super wide, it's just not going to work doing that. Right. And I have one kayak. Some of it has to do with the shape of the hull. I'm not going to go into a lot about that, but I have one of my kayaks is a really rounded hull. And it's a little bit tricky because it's too round, and if you edge too far, you can go over pretty easily. And if you go to the manufacturer's page on that boat, it says not for beginner kayakers. So yeah, it's partly the boat and partly the person. Okay. Laura has a question.
So there's a question from online, and it's can you talk a little bit about what to wear in Minnesota?
What to wear in Minnesota? Well, okay, I'll say a little bit about that. Again, it depends on the water that you're on and the temperature of the water. The rule of thumb in Minnesota is that you should dress for the temperature of the water. If you're in Lake Superior on a hot spring day, it's May, and suddenly it got up to 85. You may think, oh, I'm going to wear shorts and a t-shirt. Wrong, because first of all, you may end up in the water and the lake might be 40 degrees and you will become hypothermic really quickly. You might have cold water shock the minute you hit the water. Cotton is a bad plan. But you also want to look at the air temperature and the water temperature to make decisions about what to wear. I have found that since I'm a kayaker, I have more conversations with people where I say, what are you going to wear? I don't know, what are you going to wear? That I have since junior high.
Totally different reasons.
Totally different reasons. But yeah, so that is really a critical kind of thing. I have a dry suit and I paddle. I'm bringing pictures of it, but I have pictures of me paddling when there's icebergs on the Mississippi out from Hidden Falls. And I'm wearing a dry suit and a wool hat and neoprene gloves. And there's base layers under that dry suit to keep me warm. And I'm taking extra precautions because I still could get really chilled when I hit that water. In Texas, one of my struggles was when I went down there, the water temperature was 63, which is, this is in the Gulf. That's cool, but that's not bad. And I brought neoprene, but I didn't bring super warm stuff to wear. When that whatever hit, that cold spell hit, in 5 days, the water temperature was 51. Well, that's very different. And I was going to be, what was available there were sit-on tops. And so part of the issue was, and there was a strong wind, and we had to cross the current and shipping channel to get to the kayak trail that we were going to go on. And we looked at each other and we went, you know, not today. We're not doing it. You really need to think about what would it be like if you ended up in the water? And you always need to think about that. You may think, well, I've never flipped. Yeah, we're all kind of between swims. And just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean that it won't. And so it's really important to pay attention to that. When I first started kayaking, you guys will laugh, I said, I'm never going to kayak on Lake Superior. It's too cold and big ships go down and people die there. I'm originally from Texas. It seemed crazy. And now I have been on many trips on Lake Superior. I love to paddle on Lake Superior, but people die every year kayaking on Lake Superior. And you need to be prepared for the conditions, be prepared for the fact that the water is really, really cold, understand about hypothermia, and have the right kind of gear and boat and clothing for it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about different kinds of kayaks. Whitewater kayaks, as a general class, they're shorter and wider than long sea kayaks, but they're not as wide as wreck boats, and they turn super easily, and that's the point. They are sit-in boats. They have float bags for flotation. They typically don't have sealed hatches, so you can stuff stuff behind the seat, but water might get in if you end up pulling your spray skirt. They don't have any skeg or rudder because they already turn really easily, and you're going to wear a spray skirt for them. So there are several different kinds of whitewater boats. These are play boats. They're about 6 feet long, and you can do all kinds of tricks and gymnastics in play boats. The woman in the upper left-hand picture is Anna Levesque, who is one of the best whitewater instructors in the country. She's in Asheville, North Carolina, and she won a medal doing freestyle some years back in the Olympics for Canada. She's originally from Canada. But they do tricks. This is the freestyle stuff like this, and their boats are really teeny and kind of odd looking. Okay. They do these tricks in moderate to high flow rivers with lots of waves, and they play in the waves. You have to be good, intermediate to advanced. I've never paddled one of these, and I don't think I would be very good at it. But that's what a play boat is. And then there are what are called creek boats. Creek boats are a little bit longer. They're for steeper technical water and rocky kinds of environments where you're on relatively narrow water and you're twisting through rocks and stuff. Mostly intermediate to advanced people paddle these. They, again, have no hatches, these float bags. They don't have a skeg or rudder. You're going to be using a spray skirt with them. I have paddled these. In fact, once I was doing some whitewater classes on the St. Louis River, and I was below some rapids. We were waiting for people to come through, and there were some rafts nearby. And someone said, Fran, is that you? And there were rovers in the raft. It was pretty funny. There we were, surprise, surprise. And here I am that day. It was raining. And those are examples. Those are creek boats beside me there. And I'm wearing a spray skirt. I'm wearing, I was not wearing a full wetsuit, but I'm wearing neoprene pants and booties and a hydroskin shirt underneath a paddle jacket that is not a completely dry top, but is a mostly dry top, and layers underneath, and a helmet, because in whitewater you need to wear a helmet. If there's any risk that you're going to come out of your boat around rocks, you wear a helmet. In sea caves, I wear a helmet. There's also boats that are more crossovers, that are whitewater boats, but that are a little bit more able to do things. The crossover boats typically do have a skeg. These are a couple of different models of them. They're good in high volume rivers. They're good in shallow kinds of runs. They work for a wide range of paddlers. I've paddled one of these on the Kayaking. They may have a dry hatch, although you got to be careful. Some boats that look to have a hatch don't have a bulkhead, and water can just go behind the seat into them. So you got to double check. But these are designed to handle a wide variety of water. So you could come down the Kayaking in it and then go on to the St. Croix and not be blown all over the St. Croix because you had a skeg to drop to help you go in a straight line. Okay. And those are pretty fun. You're going to spend easily $1,000 new for a good one of those, but they're pretty fun. I don't own one, but I paddle them. So those are the three general kinds of whitewater boats. Then there are recreational kayaks, and there are many, many different sizes of these. These are wide, flat water boats. They're usually rotomolded, but sometimes there's some of the other kinds of plastic. They can be sit in or sit on top. They have, if they're sit in, they have a large cockpit. Mostly people don't use spray skirts with this, and part of the reason is their cockpit is so big. If you had big water, it would swamp the spray skirt and it wouldn't work very well anyway. Some of them might not have any bulkheads. Some of them might have one or even two. The range in length is, anywhere from maybe 9 feet to 13-ish feet or so. They have lots of primary stability and people like them, but not very much secondary stability. If you want to paddle on the St. Croix in the summer or on the chain of lakes, these are fine. These are what most places rent out. And there's just a wide variety of them. So you can see here, here's a sit on top one, here's a sit in, but look at how big that kayak is. And here are some of the bigger sit on top ones. And if you look at all of these boats, none of them have a dry hatch. Okay. So then the next step up in length, Melissa's pleased because she has one, are touring kayaks. And these are kayaks that you can really do more expeditions of trips in. Depending, you can do a day or a weekend. They have a little bit less storage room for longer trips. They're basically sit-in boats. They have bulkheads. They have 2 dry hatches, all of which is good for your gear. They can be rotomolded, or they can be made of fiberglass or composite kinds of things. They're generally about 11 to 15 feet in length. They often, but not always, have a skag or a rudder. They're narrower than those wreck boats that we were looking at. And you can see just by looking at this one. And this one has a rudder, as you can see. They have less primary stability and more secondary stability than the wreck kayaks. We have 2 tsunamis at our equipment locker, which are touring kayaks. They're rotomolded. They look a good deal like this. And then the next step up is sea kayaks. To be officially a sea kayak, it has to be probably 16 feet-ish or more, 15 and a half, 16. It has at least 2 sealed bulkheads. If you look at these boats here, you can kind of see with this one, there's a bulkhead for this hatch in the back, but then there's another sealed bulkhead and there's a day hatch behind the cockpit. And then there's a sealed bulkhead in the bow. This picture was taken at Myers Beach. And speaking to clothing, this was the day after Thanksgiving. And it was kind of cool because some of the stuff in the sea caves was frozen, but the water was still open, and it wasn't an awfully cold day. But as you can see, we are wearing dry suits, we are wearing warm hats, we are wearing neoprene boots, and we have base layers under that and the whole deal. These boats that you're looking at here, you'll notice have a lot of rocker. You can especially see it on this one, the rotomolded one in front. You can see how the ends stick up. They aren't flat on the beach there. They're sticking up because they have a lot of rocker. And all 3 of these boats have a lot of rocker. And they have skags. These can, and here's another one that demonstrates the amount of rocker that they have. And this picture, I believe this guy has a cowl much like mine. And you can see some of the rocker just in how it reflects in the water there. This is me on a bouncy day on Prior Lake. And again, you can see The waves are bouncing up. The boat cuts through the waves pretty well. I have a spray skirt on, so I'm not getting wet. I'm wearing a dry suit and a warm hat and all of that. So that's kind of what that kind of sea kayak looks like. Some people who go on expeditions want one with less rocker, and typically, so the ones with rocker typically have skegs, because guess what? If the stern is way up in the air, the rudder's not reaching the water, and it's not very useful. And so a skeg that is a little bit more more towards the center of the kayak, not really, I mean, it's still in the stern, but it sticks down into the water from underneath the boat, is gonna grab the water better. This one doesn't have as much rocker and has a rudder. The rudder is not deployed. The rudder here can flip down and be in the water. Some people paddle and don't use them that much. The rudder is really, people think it's about steering, but it's about going straight in when you have wind. Most long kayaks turn into the wind automatically. And so the issue is how you can deal with that. And the stern, a skeg or a rudder will pin down the stern so that the stern doesn't get blown around. Okay. And here is one that is a super long sea kayak and is really made for touring. And you can see those ends don't have any rocker at all. They're pretty much straight up and down. There's a rudder. I believe this picture's on Superior, but I'm not sure. He's wearing a dry suit and a helmet and all of that. Yes.
What's the advantage or difference with the rocker? I see what it is, but why would you want it or not want it?
Because it makes the boat more maneuverable. Boats with rocker are a little bit slower, but they're more maneuverable. You can edge them and they'll move and be more maneuverable. When you edge them, you change the water line a lot. And so I don't know, they're more playful. It's how much it's basically how the ends go up versus going straight. So in this one, you can see this boat has no rocker. I'm sorry. That question was about what rocker is, and really rocker is how much the bow and the stern turn up. There are different designs, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on kayak design any more than just the rocker stuff, but there are different ways that they make. Some are more rounded on the hull. Some have what are called hard tines. The sides are hard, and there's a clear demarcation between the hull and the sides of the boat. So those are some of the differences there. So now I just want to mention a little bit about fishing kayaks. There are people who love to fish. Fishing kayaks are super stable sit-on tops with lots of places for rods and fishing gear. They're real stable. They tend to be rotomolded. They tend to weigh a ton. They're super, super heavy. Some of them, there are even ones of them that you don't have to paddle. They have pedals, and you can pedal them around. So that's one there. This guy is bringing in a small sand shark. Isn't that cool? And look at all the gear and all the rods and all the stuff that he has on that boat. Now, this is not going to be great if he's in big waves and big water, but for the purposes of fishing, people love these. Some of them are so stable you can stand up on them. And here's a guy with his rod fishing from a fishing kayak. So there are specific kayaks that are made for fishing. I've even seen some in previous years before the pandemic anyway, at the Midwest Expo when they had a bunch of them. There's inflatable kayaks. This is much like the one that I flipped on the Salmon River. They're sit on top. They seem kind of raft-like. Mostly they're made as recreational boats, but some are made. The one I was in was clearly designed for whitewater kind of stuff, for whitewater rivers. So that's an inflatable kayak. And, you know, it's not going to take up very much space. You got to get the air in, And if you put a hole in it, then you got a problem. And you have to do something about getting air in and patching that, or you're not going to be going anyplace. Which speaks to the importance of a good repair kit and duct tape. There are folding kayaks. So I'm going to show you several pictures of these. This is an Oru, which is one brand, which looks almost like an origami kayak. And you can see, there it is. It reminds me of some of those camping dishes that fold up and stuff. Although it's made of heavier plastic. And you can fold it up. Now, it doesn't have any flotation, and that's an issue. They can be super convenient. You can travel on a plane or in your trunk. You can store in your closet if you live in a small apartment. The question is, what about flotation on the body of water you're on? Do they fit with the kind of kayaking and the stuff that you want to do? Some of them, the plastic ones less so, but some of them have to be carefully dried out. There was an old kind called feathercraft, and that material had to be carefully dried out. And if you left it all season assembled, because it was a pain to assemble around the aluminum structure, then you might have difficulties at the end of the season. So this is the Oru. This is the Tuk Tek, which is really small and also easily assembled in 15, 20 minutes and fits in all kinds of small places. But guess what? There's a sea kayak version of this. This is the Track boat. TRAK is the brand name. And it can be assembled in under half an hour. It is really seaworthy. I've been on trips on Lake Superior along in the islands, in the Rossport Islands. I was on a 6-day trip, and 2 of our boats were track boats. Now, you may wonder about flotation and dry hatches. So one of the things you can do with some of these boats is have something called a sea sock. And what a sea sock is, you put it inside, it attaches to the coaming, the rim of the cockpit. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. To the rim of the cockpit, and then you climb inside it. And if water gets in the boat, the sea sock holds it. You can put flotation bags in it. You can put your gear in dry bags, and that adds some air to it. And so there are ways to add flotation to it. They're pretty good boats. They're pretty decent boats. They tend to be expensive. They tend to be on back order. And another thing that's kind of cool is, supposing that you're out in the water and you've been paddling a long way in a straight line and stuff, and now you want to do a little bit more playing in and out of the rocks and stuff on the water with moving some things while you are in it and your gear is in it, you can change the rocker on this boat, which is kind of an astonishing thing. So that's the Track boat.
How much is expensive?
Joni asks how much is expensive. I think you're probably going to be looking at $4,900 for it.
Yeah.
That is expensive, yes.
Is that what it looks like folded up?
That's no, that's the bag that you put it in. And it's got wheels in it, and you can carry it, take it on a plane. I know people who travel around the world with them. When I go places, I have to rent something when I get there. This is something called a Kayak, which comes apart and rolls up and goes in that bag there. I don't know very much about these. I've just heard a little bit about them. I've never actually had been around one or seen one directly, but they're out there among the folding kayaks.
I keep seeing where you stick it together.
Well, they I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure how it's held together, and I'm not sure how much they run.
Apparently it works.
Yeah.
People buy them. So you got all these boats. So how do you decide? Well, you think about the factors, you think about what you want to do. But what I'm encouraging people to do is not just look and go, oh, well, this boat looks really cool. Or, my friend so-and-so likes this kind of boat or whatever. I should get a boat with a lot of rocker because that's what Fran likes. Don't do that. Go and try out boats. Try them out, paddle them, see how they feel. You can rent boats. Now, most park rentals are going to be wreck boats. They're not going to be these other things. But you can rent some other kinds of boats from REI and Midwest. Go to club meetings. So in the Twin Cities, the Rapid Riders, that's the Whitewater group. They have pool sessions every frickin' Sunday, all winter long. They have something called Canoe U in the spring, which teaches people about whitewater. I'll say more about that in a minute. Inland sea kayakers, a lot. I'm not the only kayak hoarder around. And many people are happy to let somebody try a boat. Often people sell used boats too. So try different boats. Go to boat demos. There'll be one on Thursday night before the Midwest Expo in April. They always have one then, and then Midwest has them during the summer, usually on Lake Nokomis.
When I want to try something out, I call the US Mountain and find out when they're going to do their demo. And then I will ask them, what are you bringing? They'll say, what would you like to try? So they will accommodate by bringing things that you want
Yes.
to try.
Yes, Joni makes a good point. If there's something you specifically want to try, call Midwest before the demo and talk to them about it, and they can bring it. Okay, and that's really handy. So you can also go to kayak symposiums. I'm going to talk about a number of those in a minute, but they have demos. They have manufacturers reps there. Sometimes you can rent a kayak for the length of the weekend, the symposium, and try it out. And they have classes. So they have all kinds of opportunities at those. All of those things will help you decide. Most people, when they get their first kayak, they paddle it a while, and then after a while, they have a better idea about what they want. And they may sell, or they may start their kayak hoarding and get another one. And that's how you end up with a few in your garage. Hardcore kayakers say that the ideal number of kayaks is N+1, where N is the number you already have. So when you think about your tax fund, you mean kayak gear stimulus package? So what are some ways to save money when you do this? Almost all of the kayaks I bought have been used. Okay, so buy used, lots of people sell stuff, and that can help you avoid some of those hefty manufacturer prices. Go to the Midwest auction. Now here's a hint. If you go to the Midwest auction, don't buy a wreck boat. At one point I was looking for a wreck boat that I could bang around in creeks and stuff. And I went to the auction, and I had a friend scoping out the same boats inside on sale new. And people got excited at the auction. You got to be careful about auctions. People would get excited, and they were paying more than the stuff on sale new was. Okay. Wreck boats tend to go super high there. On the other hand, sea kayaks are more of a niche thing, and people go, oh, I don't know if I'm going to paddle that. And you can get better deals on sea kayaks, but be sure that it's the boat you want. Don't just go, oh, good, it's a sea kayak I can get for cheap. Be sure it's the one that you want. Join clubs. People sell boats in the clubs a lot. Watch for sales. Now, the sale prices at the Spring Expo can be good, but the better prices are in the fall when they're getting rid of a lot of their boats. Or if you can find an outfitter who has demo boats or boats they've rented all season, and now they want to clear them out for the winter. That's a great time. So that's a good time to do it. You may think, well, I'd just be looking around in Minnesota. Well, sometimes people get good deals online, and among paddling groups where It's a small world and people know each other. Sometimes you can set something up for, a couple $100. Somebody buys a kayak, that's what they want, and they know it's what they want. It's down in Florida, and somebody, in summer is coming back up from Florida to Minnesota, and they go, yeah, give me some money to up with the gas and I'll bring you a kayak. So there are deals like that get worked out. If you're handy, of course, you can always build your own boat, a wooden or a skin-on frame. And there are some clubs and groups that help people to do that, if that's something you want to do. So those are ways to save money. You don't have to spend those expensive list prices on a lot of those kayaks. Suppose that you've been doing some recreational paddling and you really want to move up just from flat water to something else. The most important thing is to take classes, especially safety classes. This is where you can learn really how to handle the water. I mentioned rapids riders have classes and pool sessions. Canoe U, which they have in May and June, usually they do some pool session things about it, and then some on the water things, and then they have a weekend camping trip like in June. If you really want to learn whitewater, and they have two tracks, they have whitewater canoeing and whitewater kayaking. And so if you really want to learn whitewater, I would go through them. Inland sea kayakers have classes. They have winter pool sessions, probably 3 or 4 a month, November through March. They have gear swaps. So you can get deals on gear that people want to trade up, or that people have hoarded too much, want to clean out their garage or whatever. UMD offers kayak classes. And sometimes when I've been involved in some North Shore kayak camp cleanups, there's always a Duluth contingency of serious kayakers, and many of them learned at UMD. There's classes at local parks and through the DNR. I took a class when I was first starting. It was part of the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program with the DNR. So that was pretty cool. I mentioned symposiums. So here are the symposiums that I know for sure are happening this summer, or actually West Michigan Sea Kayak Symposium is over Memorial Day in Traverse City. And it really talks about specializing in beginner to intermediate people. Door County Sea Kayak Symposium is usually the weekend after the 4th of July, happening in Door County. And they also talk about being really beginner and intermediate. Great Lakes Sea Kayaking Symposium happens usually the weekend after the Door County one in Grand Rapids. You can camp there's a municipal campground, and that's a pretty fun one. More intermediate kind of people, but one of the cool things about it is that every single time I've gone, I've been on a trip as part of a smaller group. Everybody gets to go to Picture Rocks. So you can paddle Picture Rocks with guides and with experienced people. So that's pretty cool. If you're really hardcore and you want to be experienced and know how to handle yourself, the Gale Storm Gathering Rough Water Kayak Symposium happens in October in Munising. And sometimes that's a real experience, and it really is a rough water kayaking symposium. So those are places that you can really learn. And it's important to learn the skills, because as you step up, there is more risk. And you need to know about what you need kayak-wise, gear-wise, and how to assess the risks. A lot of that gets addressed at these symposiums. All of these symposiums, except for the Gales, have people from the kayak companies there, and so you can demo stuff on the beach. You can make arrangements to rent a kayak for the weekend. You could have the opportunity to try a lot of stuff out, because what I like in a kayak may not at all be what you like in a kayak, and what's comfortable to me to sit in all day may not at all be what's comfortable for you. There's other kinds of resources. I love to go to Canoecopia the second weekend in March in Madison. They have sales. They have lots of classes and demonstrations. They have demonstrations of skills in the hotel pool. It's a good place to meet a lot of people and get to know Midwestern paddlers. You don't get to be on the water. I mean, it's indoors, but everybody is all excited because spring is coming, and they're excited to get together, and it's a really fun thing. Kayak USA, that's the traditional paddling thing that I was mentioning. They do lots of boat building and help with that, and classes. People carve their own wooden versions of Greenland paddles and stuff. They have various gatherings all around the country. 2 of them happen in Minnesota. In mid-May is something called Kayak Camp, and it's spelled Qajaq, which is down on Lake Pepin in Lake City. And the other one is in the fall, typically the weekend after Labor Day, in Minnesota near Brainerd. And so those are opportunities to experiment and to paddle some of those boats, even if you don't own one. So that's a fun kind of thing. Here's the other thing that I'm going to do. I'm planning. Several years ago, I did this. I had a beginner sea kayaking trip to Voyageurs National Park, and I'm planning to do one of those again this year. And we'll be having some sessions to get ready for it, to practice rescues, to see what it's like to pack all your gear in your boat and paddle a boat that's full of gear, and to do things like that. There's not going to be a lot of spots because the campgrounds that we're going to be at only have really spots for 8 people. And I'm going to do it with a friend of mine. And so we're taking up 2 of those spots. And it's important that we're both experienced paddlers to help people. I'm also considering doing a kayak-based camping weekend, maybe in Chequamegon National Forest. There's some nice campgrounds there that might be fun for people to come along, for us to bring as many kayaks as we can and paddle around a lot. So those are some of the kinds of opportunities if you want to go further. I know more about sea kayaking, and that's more my passion than whitewater. But there are a lot of whitewater opportunities too. It's important to do this. There's all kinds of critical safety skills and gear and awareness and planning. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but that's real important stuff. But when you do this, you can go cool places and paddle around cool things. That's, of course, Split Rock. And I took that picture with a group of friends who are paddling on the water down below, which is fun to do. And this is in Baja. We hiked up here, but there's kayaks down there on the beach. So you can go all kinds of cool places. And you can, yes. Lori says, and run into rovers at Baja. Strangely enough, when this trip ended, I was walking down the street with some of my friends in Loretto, and a car went by and started honking and shouting at us, and turned around, and it was Rob and Lori and Stammers, and it was pretty funny. You run into rovers everywhere. So questions, and be careful because I might randomly talk about kayaks.
So a couple questions from online.
Sure.
So the first one is at the end of the presentation, trying to go back to the slide that had the folding kayak brand names spelled out.
Oh. Sure. There you go. That doesn't have the Kayak one, but it's got Feathercraft, which is an older one, Uru, Trax, and Tuk Tuk.
So the next question also from Pam is, what exercise program is needed to keep up strength to kayak and for the sea kayak trip you mentioned?
Okay. I think a lot of what's important is core strength and the question, I'm sorry, the question was about what helps build up strength for the kayak trip that I mentioned. Part of it is core strength. People think that kayaking is about your arms, but if you're doing it right, it involves torso rotation and you bicycle with your feet. And so core strength is important. Also, flexibility is really helpful, especially with those of us with artificial knees who are getting on and out of little bitty cockpits. Yoga is great. I know a lot of kayakers who spend a lot of time doing yoga, and I should do more. And also just getting out and paddling. Kayakers talk about, when they ask about how you develop skills, one of the answers is, but in boat time. And really, that's the more that you do it, especially if you're getting appropriate kinds of hints and suggestions so you don't develop bad habits, the better you'll be. And we will do stuff to prep for that trip. Joni has a question.
I love kayaking, as you know, and I have bought and sold kayak on Yahoo Marketplace. I've sold two and I've bought one, so that is not the best price. But I developed tendonitis in the thumb, and assuming that it gets better, I'm looking at possibly a bench shaft. And I wonder if you have a
So Joni she had a comment, and that was that she has bought and sold kayaks on Yahoo Marketplace. But the other thing that she mentioned was developing tendonitis in her thumb. And if you look at my left thumb, I mean, I have swelling there too. I have the kind of brace that you're wearing right now, that Joni's wearing right now, which was recommended to me by a kayak coach.
well, I'm a physical therapist like that, but it wasn't kayak that did it.
Yeah.
The broken arm, I overcompensated the other arm.
Okay. So the other thing that some people like, so I use this funny Greenland paddle. And some people question, I wouldn't use it on whitewater because it goes deep into the water. Okay. And whitewater, that doesn't work. And it's a little bit slower to accelerate your first couple of strokes. If you're putting it deep in the water, it's got as much surface area. You do it at a little bit of an angle. You don't do it straight on, you do it a little bit of an angle. So it has some wing effect. But it also is easier for us old people on the joints. I know a lot of people with shoulder issues, elbow issues, and other issues who've used it and found it easier on their joints. I also know people who use the bend shaft paddles. They're expensive. Well, the bend shaft paddles are expensive. If you really want one, I might have one that I might sell you.
I just want to know.
Or that you could experiment. Okay. Well, so the question is, how do you keep a straight wrist? Torquing your wrist can really cause some of those issues sometimes. And so the trick is trying to keep a straight wrist when you paddle. And with the bent shaft, that allows that to happen. You also want to pay attention to how much you feather it if you're using Euroblade. Obviously, feathering is not an issue with one of these. What I suggest you do is experiment. And like I say, if you want to borrow my bent shaft paddle, I bought it in the early days. It's probably too long for me, which would probably be an advantage for you.
I'm considerably taller than you, so that
Exactly my thinking. So, yeah. Other questions? So feel free to email me or call me because, I'm randomly talking about kayaking. If you want to know more, you can get me randomly talking, but be careful because it is addicting. And thanks for listening. I'm sharing. Oh, yeah. There we go. And
Leave it because.
So there's one last question, Fran. What event is in Lake City, Minnesota? Where is the information online?
I don't think registration has opened. It's called Kayak Camp, Qajaq. You can go to the website, or email me. I'm actually on their board. So I can share more information. It fills up pretty quickly because it's a small event, but it's a lot of fun. We build kayaks there out of scrap wood, and we wrap them in industrial strength cellophane and race and roll them in competition. We have 90 minutes to build these kayaks. It's hilarious.
Fran, I should mention that, you just mentioned, River Ramblers and their webmaster. The schedule's coming out very soon,
Okay.
and it's just, rivers and flatwater, Mississippi, Zelro, but like that.
Good point. I'm sorry I didn't mention those. Joni is saying that I didn't mention River Ramblers. They basically are flat water and rivers and paddling like that. And their schedule is about to come out.
There are a couple of whitewater trips. There are some weekends.
Okay. They do some whitewater trips and some weekend trips, Joni says. So that's another good. Thanks for adding it.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below.